Welcome to the program. As you know, the Supreme Court on Monday did actually they issued one good ruling.
Yeah, really the whole session.
Pretty much the whole session. I'm trying to think if there was another one that I thought was really good.
I'm too. Was there?
Maybe there was a couple, but I don't remember. The EPA one, though, is arguably the biggest ruling. There's a case to be made that the EPA ruling was the biggest ruling in the entire session. You had gay marriage, but everyone kind of knew that was happening. Plus, it was already in 37 states. So you're kind of already, you were pretty much already there anyway.
Obamacare, which we already had.
Obamacare was big, however, even if it had gone the way we wanted it to go, there's a good chance that a lot of these states would have just created their own exchanges anyway, and it would have been a positive ruling, but whether it would have changed the world, I don't know. The EPA makes a lot of laws, and I would say they wouldn't call them laws, but you know, it doesn't matter what they call them. They get to essentially hoist policy up on the entire country whenever they want.
Yeah, 70,000 regulations, right? Isn't it 70,000?
Like yeah. And most of these are, not even challenged. They did a big-time overreach earlier, and the way that this came down is part of the ruling, and it's an interesting one. I want to bring on, if we could, Kathleen Hartnett White. She's joining us, and you're from the Texas Public Policy Foundation. Is that right, Kathleen?
Yes, I am.
Thanks so much for coming on. You really have been following this closely. Can you start us at the beginning? Walk us through the rules that they made that were actually challenged in the Supreme Court.
The rule that they were challenging was one of the about a dozen EPA rules promulgated over the Obama administration's terms about what people call traditional pollutants, or I call real pollutants, that if, in fact, at high enough levels and exposures can harm human health, not CO2. But expressly, ozone and particulate matter, and I won't go on. But this is a challenge to the mercury rule, which EPA, in its own words, identifies as the most expensive rule to date that ever promulgated. And in fact, that factor was a driver in this Supreme Court ruling. The Supreme Court ruled that EPA erred by not considering the extraordinary costs in this rule. And maybe you've looked at this, but this is staggering. What EPA estimates is the annual cost of compliance is about $9.6 billion. That's every year in the electric power sector, not one, just for this rule. And its own estimate of the benefits are $6 million. $9.6 billion costs, $6 million in alleged health benefits. I would argue there are no health benefits.
Wait, 9.6 billion? Are you saying, Kathleen, with a B?
I'm B as in baby boy.
Wow.
Billion.
And then you get 6 million
right.
For the 9.6 billion.
The Supreme Court did its arithmetic.
Wow. And
indeed, 9.6 billion is about 2,400 times higher than 6 million. When you get to the B's and the T's, you get so many zeros. It's sometimes the magnitude of the difference is hard to cipher.
It's incredible. Because the case really was about the idea that they even had to bother considering what the costs were, right? Their position going in is, I don't care if it costs $27 trillion. We don't have to think about that.
No, exactly. That what the court rejected was that EPA said that they could disregard costs. That was that. But that in that way, it's not a vacature of the rule. The court just sent EPA back in the so-called remand form to redo it better, which is one of the really insidious parts of the way most court decisions about in EPA's rules. Some of them, it's been rare that anything's actually been vacated. They send them back, and then you have, and we hear the words about all the time, but it's a vicious infection in our whole country. You have a totally unpredictable, unreliable regulatory system. You can try to comply just because you want to stay in business, even if you don't think it's worthwhile, and you try to comply, and then EPA changes the rules of the game or spends so much time, there's so much time on litigation that there's no way businesses can plan.
What does this mean, Kathleen, for instance, coal companies, for the coal industry, which has been having a really hard time just staying in business because of some of these regulations. And the fact that Barack Obama, by his own admission, was trying to drive them directly out of business and bankrupt the coal industry. Does this help them out very much?
In part, yes, and I just would like to wholeheartedly agree with you. This rule is not about reducing mercury or protecting human health. It's about killing coal.
Mm-hmm.
It's directly about that's its purpose. Yeah, I think if one's an optimist or pessimist, is the glass half full or the glass half empty? I think that's actually the situation. But this rule also comes on the heels of another reversal of one of EPA's first rules to reduce carbon dioxide that we call the tailoring rule, where EPA changed the numbers in the Clean Air Act in order to, the Clean Air Act says if you emit 100 tons of XYZ pollutant, you must be regulated in a certain way. And EPA said, oh, no, if we do that with carbon dioxide, instead of regulating 12 sources, we'll be regulating 6 million, like your church and your hospital. And so EPA said, let's just call that, instead of 100, let's call that 100,000. The courts, in at least dramatic rhetoric, said that does not go. You cannot rewrite the black letter words of the Clean Air Act. So on this decision, there's a perilous majority. That means how Justice Kennedy feels on the day he makes his conclusion.
Right. Yeah, it's interesting because he was fine with things being rewritten for Obamacare, but not so much with this particular one.
Right.
That's amazing.
Without the court's checks. I mean, wow. EPA is on I've watched EPA for 6 years. For 30 years. I was chairman of Texas Large Environmental Regulatory Agency for 6 years. I've been inside hassling with EPA all day about the state's big ozone plan and all that. Until this administration, EPA would make a lot of bad decisions, and it never stopped trying to expand its domain and tighten standards. But there's an exponential difference with this administration, and nothing has been stopping it. Nothing has been stopping it.
Is this something you've noticed? Because there's something I've kind of noticed as far as the way the court operates, which is when the conservatives and the conservative side, as in this case, wins a judgment, as you kind of pointed out, it gets sent back down. They have to rework it. It's very limited in its scope. When the liberals on the Supreme Court win a case, it seems to have these expansive consequences that range out throughout society and echo through almost every aspect of our life. Is that something that I'm just noticing because I don't like the liberal decisions, or is that something that...
No, I think if you ever wanted to, people predicted decades ago when Richard Nixon created the EPA that it created a new era. If Woodrow Wilson established the ideological basis for the left's, expansion of central government. Roosevelt created a civil kind of engineering of the country. LBJ created a kind of social engineering of the country. EPA created economic engineering, which is the entire country. So if you want to use those, and Congress wrote the laws, in the 1970s, never imagining that EPA would be trying to eliminate the source of 40% of all our electricity. And so EPA, you can get away with a lot if you want to pull it. And these are good signs from the court, but oh my goodness, like I said, a perilous one vote majority. Yeah,
which, you can never rest easy with that kind of thing because it could come up again at virtually any time. That was a really nice breakdown of the progression of this progressive mentality and how far we've come in a relatively short time with this new progressive mentality in this country. Back when they were trying to sell this plan to Americans, Lisa Jackson at the EPA said, we're actually at the point in many areas of the country that the best advice is don't go outside. Don't breathe the air. It might kill you. How do we combat that kind of rhetoric, Kathleen?
Well, those words are dear to my heart because I wrote a long, geeky research paper called EPA's Pretense of Science Regulating Phantom Risk on the basis of that outrageous statement you just quoted. This country has reduced real pollution by amazing amounts. 70%, what the Clean Air Act calls the main 6 criteria pollutants, those have been reduced by 70%.
Wow.
I could go on and on and on.
Since when?
Conjures up these health effects that don't exist at all.
Can you, Kathleen, do you have a date? Like, they've been reduced 70% since when? Since what timetable?
Oh, people, folks that work with this argue about that. Probably since, actually, I think it's later. I think it's really the 80s on.
Yeah, that would be my guess.
They started going down, though, in the 60s before the Clean Air Act. And if you're a follower of the theories that show you that as economic growth creates more and more prosperity in any country, at a certain point, environmental quality becomes important. If you're just working for subsistence existence, environmental considerations are really kind of a luxury.
Yeah, I mean, wealthy countries are clean countries, and you see this around the world with one of the biggest killers in the world is burning, for heat and cooking, burning wood and such and dung inside the home. Because it's so difficult in so many of the third world countries to actually get electricity. When you get electricity, when you start getting these things and you're surviving on a day-to-day basis, you start caring a lot more about your environment.
Not only developing countries, the European Union will tell you that of these grand commitments EU members made to renewable energy, 20% renewable by 2020, 2030 by 30, all the way till you get to 80%. The renewable that accounts for 50% of what European countries now call renewables is wood.
Wood?
It's wood. It's wood. It was declared politically to be carbon neutral because of the brilliant insight that you can burn one and you can plant one, but it's absolutely ridiculous.
So taking wood, chopping down a tree, and lighting it on fire is renewable energy?
Yes, it's renewable energy.
Oh, God. It would be laughable, I
That's
suppose,
perfect.
if it wasn't
That
so
is
scary.
perfect.
Let me give you one more from Lisa Jackson, which I love this. This is from, of course, she was with the EPA. If we could reduce particulate matter and of course that's basically pollution, to levels that are healthy, it would have the identical impact to finding a cure for cancer. Is there any science that actually supports a claim like that?
Absolutely none. There is no particulate matter. Particulate matter, by the way, is like twice or 3 times higher anytime you're inside a building because the fibers of clothes and there's no air dispersion. Your house is a very dangerous place because of the clothes in your closet. No, our country, every place in our country has been below levels of particulate matter that could. Where's the highest correlation between ill health and pollution versus ill health and income? The correlations on health are very, very gauzy.
Yeah.
Those on income are very, very high.
Let me give you some other stats cited by the EPA. The EPA concluded that the Clean Air Act, the CAA, will save 230,000 lives in 2020. They will prevent premature mortality. The EPA monetizes the saved lives at $2 trillion. And compliance costs only $65 billion. So they're saving us a ton of money on all of this.
You've got to read my boring paper on that precise topic, which I dismembered. There is nothing to it. First of all, the lives that EPA talks about saving, there's not people that have died from any condition that some doctor has said was pollution. Whenever they see in their very, very incomplete statistics some correlation between a slightly increased rate of death, and ask a statistician what increased rate of death is, because we all die. But what an increased rate of death? Well, they see a correlation between that and some slight elevation on a monitor. They count that. They count all the deaths in hospitals attributed to a cardiovascular or respiratory condition, a death by that pollutant. And there's no such thing. The lives they're talking about statistical contracts. Their little statisticians find some number from those correlations, and that creates a statistical life. And this, I could go on and on, but a clincher, the average, insurance companies in their actuarial tables use try to make estimates on lives gained and lives lost, and average age for this and average age for that. But most actuaries will say that the value of an adult life, male life at 25, is $8 or $9 million. EPA uses that number to value what ends up to be, if you do this complicated math, 3 additional months of life for an octogenarian. I mean, it's all so when you unpeel it, and it should be offensive to people that EPA is taking people's totally justifiable interest in their health and their children's health, because it is totally beyond the pale. That is not EPA's claims like that. It's pure propaganda.
Kathleen, I mean, and you obviously are an expert in this field, and I think part of this issue, though, is it's over our reliance on experts. I think not enough people go through and read the boring papers anymore. There's not enough people that spend the time to look into this stuff. So when some, smart person is telling you, well, this is going to cost millions of lives, people just sort of accept it and move on with their day. And it's really, you need to do more homework than that at this point.
I understand that, and there's no reason why people should. I mean, it just, if I really think I'm not passing this off, but our national leaders could take this up. And you know what? And particularly the U.S. House in the previous Congress, they had scores of hearings just about what we're talking about, and picking EPA's rules apart. They've got a subpoena out that EPA's refused to comply with for over 2 years to get the raw data for the basis, and EPA won't even give it to them. We're just dysfunctional.
It's amazing.
But
Oh, go ahead. What did you want to
No,
finish?
I would like to think without, people don't need to read 1,000-page EPA rules. How pathetic that is. I mean, but if you have leadership which has basic ethics, I actually think basic ethics contribute to capacity for objectivity versus manipulation. If you had that sort of perspective, that person could reveal, the absolutely hollow suit that is EPA's claim about current levels of pollution in human health.
Well, now you're getting into crazy town. We're never going to be able to get there. Okay, that's just not going to happen.
We're always going to be bad.
We will give you some bonus points, however, for bringing up Woodrow Wilson on this network.
Yeah,
that's something,
awesome.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you.
Kathleen Hartnett White from the Texas Public Policy Foundation. Thanks so much for coming on the program.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.